Good morning, vinyl community. It's Matt and I'm back for another video. Beatles community also, I should say, music community. Thought I'd do a little something different this morning. This is the big day. It's Friday, November 9th, 2018, and the Beatles White Album 50th Anniversary Edition is being released in many different formats. And especially the one I'm really looking forward to is the big Super Deluxe copy or version, which should be, I'm hoping, arrive today in the mail for me. That's the one that I ordered first. And I'm sure I'll do a seal to reveal video, or I'll do an unboxing video sometime this weekend like everybody else will probably be doing. And I've already seen a couple of them and they look fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to showing off my copy. But I thought I'd do something a little different for this first video about the White Album. My little memories and remembrance of the White Album and what it means to me. And to do that, I brought out my very first copy of the White Album, and excuse the glare, I know with the white it kind of messes with the different hues and stuff of the image, but I want to do something a little different. I brought out my first ever copy of the White Album. If you've ever seen any of my past videos, you know I've talked about my taping, my horrible taping job I used to do as a little kid. When my album started to get, a couple of years old, I thought I was protecting them by putting Scotch tape on them, so I thought I'd show you. Here's my original White Album with the yellow, formerly clear Scotch tape is now yellowed and brown, and I put it all over the edges of my original White Album, thinking I was protecting. You got to see the inside of this thing with the tape all in the inside binder here. But that's the way, there's even some of it's so old it's drying out and peeling off now. I don't think it did anything to protect my White Album because I've always taken care of my records. But anyway, I wanted to show you this. I got this when I was a very young boy. I'm not sure if my parents bought this for me or I requested it and went into a store and got it. But it's not a numbered version. I got this in the very early 70s. I was either 10 or 11 years old. So it had to be around 1970, 1971 maybe. I got my first White Album, and it doesn't have the number on it, but it does have the embossed logo of the Beatles right here, as you can see. Alright, and on the inside, you can see it has the song list and the 4 images of the Beatles with the tape all over the place. So I wanted to show that to you today because it has a lot of special memories for me, this album. Not only this actual copy, but also the White Album in general, so I thought I'd share some of them with you today. And before I do that, let me just show you, I did take care of the inside. The inner wrap is getting a little bit brown from age. The thing's almost 50 years old. I'll show you one of my vinyls. I was pretty good as a kid. I mean, there's some, I wouldn't play this copy anymore. There's some fingerprints and things on it over the years, but, for 1970 or 71 when I got this, it's not in bad shape. It's actually in pretty good shape. And here's my original poster. And you're going to see there's a lot of Scotch tape in the corners on it. Right there. I mean, I'm sure I hung this and moved it around many different times throughout my life. Very glossy. The poster's very glossy. And, there's a couple of tears in it. And like I said, the tape. But it's still in pretty good shape. Go ahead and let you see that. And I still have the original 4 glossy images that I got with it. I'll show you each one. As you can see, the corners are missing some of the color to them because as you can see the tape marks. God only knows how many places and walls these things hung on over the years, but there's John. George's is a little better. Again, you can still see some of the original. You probably can't see it well, but there's still Scotch tape up in these corners from many decades ago. There's Paul. There's a tape all over it. Nice image of Paul there. And Ringo. Okay. There you go. So, this album, I have to tell you, it was, I think I've told stories about it in the past, but it was the only rock and roll record. If you went back and saw my dad's videos, the videos I did with my dad about the music he loved growing up and how he shared his love for music with us as kids and bought me records, and my mom also. And if you get a chance, check out my videos with my dad. I thought they were probably some of the best I've ever done. And so I listened to a lot of music that my parents were playing, but the only time my parents ever asked me to listen to music was they wanted to hear the White Album. When I first got this copy right here, back like I said, 70 or 71, I remember my parents wanting me to play it and sit down and listen to it with me, which I thought was a big deal, you know, being that young, like I said, 10 or 11. And that was the only time they ever wanted to sit and listen to a Beatles album with me. So it brings back a lot of memories of, you know, my parents sharing their love for music with me over the years, especially in my formative years, and buying me my first Beatles records, Meet the Beatles and A Hard Day's Night, and then through the later years helping me acquire other records, or my dad bringing me records, especially the Beatles. And this was a special one because this one I listened to a lot. I listened to it with my parents. I really got into this album. There was so much variety to this album and the songs on it. I loved every bit of it, even as a young boy. And I carry that with me throughout the years. When I went into the service about 10 years later, 1979, 1980 time frame, I remember, you know, you're away from home. I was overseas for a couple of years. The first 2 years I was 18 years old. And I remember getting over there and, you know, bringing my records with me. I had my White Album with me, carried it all over the world with me. And I remember being in the hallway at the dorm, or the barracks, whatever you want to call it, like one of my first days there, and seeing this young boy, well at the time, he was 18 or 19 years old also, sitting in the hallway and rocking out on his little, he had a Gibson Les Paul Jr., they called it, a 1958 Gibson Les Paul Jr. It was black and white. And I remember him sitting in the hallway playing on this guitar, and I was like, wow, who's this guy, and what's he playing there? And struck up a friendship with this young man, who is now my age, or a little older actually. His name was Chris, and Chris was he's been my lifelong friend since I met him that day in the service. We became roommates, and what really bonded us was Chris had a love for the heavier rock and roll. He got me into like the Van Halen, AC/DC, was some of the Ted Nugent, Rush, those types of bands he was into, which back then we considered like the heavy metal, you know, I guess, back in the late 70s, early 80s. And in exchange, I exchanged with him, I gave him my love for the Beatles and music of that nature, especially the Beatles. I mean, at that time, 1979, 1980, I was a mega Beatles fan. I think 80% of my time was spent on the Beatles and 20% on other music, which it's changed quite a bit since then, as you know from my videos. But I got him into the Beatles, and we listened to many different Beatles albums, probably all of them. We got into many of them. I remember specifically getting into Revolver and Rubber Soul and Abbey Road. He liked, you know, the heavier songs like And Your Bird Can Sing, and he liked I Want You from Abbey Road, you know, songs of that nature. But the album we got into the most together for the 2 years that we were in the service together overseas was this one, the White Album. We listened to this album incessantly. I got him so into this album, I think it became like his favorite Beatles album. And what I like about Chris is that he liked all aspects of it. He got into the slower ballady tunes like Blackbird and Julia and Long, 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 those types of songs. But boy, what really grabbed him initially was the heaviness of this album, how it's raw, it's rocking, it's a totally different type of recording than Sgt. Pepper was a year earlier. This thing is really stripped down and rocks. And he got into the songs like Back in the USSR, Birthday, Helter Skelter, Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey, Your Blues, all the heavy rockers on this album. He just fell in love with them, and to this day, if I asked him, I'm sure it's his favorite Beatles album of all time. So many wonderful memories. I've stayed in touch with Chris over the years. You know, as all friendships go, sometimes you go through short periods where you're not in touch, and you get back in touch. But I'm in touch with him now as of 2018. We are in pretty regular contact, and he doesn't know it yet because I don't think he watches my channel. But I ordered one of the new copies of the White Album, one of the versions of the White Album I ordered for him, and I'm having it shipped to his house. So I'm hoping I'll hear from him within the next week or so. And I sent a little note with it saying that, hey, thanks for the great memories of this album. You were my Beatles and listening partner when we were in the service together overseas, and I wanted to thank him, and I told him to enjoy the new album, the new release. So I'm just excited to tell you that, because I can't wait for Chris to get the album in the mail, and I think maybe it will spark him to bring back all those memories for him as well. So I'm looking forward to that. As the years went on, I gotta say one thing about the White Album. It really reminds me of autumn, and autumn reminds me of the White Album, if that makes any sense for any of you out there. And I know it was released in the autumn, as we all know. It was released 50 years ago, autumn of 1968. But for some reason, you know, I don't know when I first got it, when I was a young boy, but this album has always reminded me of the autumn. And whenever the autumn kicks in, I think of the White Album, and I have to listen to it. I have to put it on at least once during that time of year. I don't know if that's the same for any of you, but it's an album that I have to listen to during that period of the year. Have to do it. And so this is special that this is coming out now of the 50th anniversary. I have another friend who became friends with years after Chris. Like I said, I met Chris in 1979, and we're still friends to this day from being young teenagers in the service. I now want to tell you about another friend who I met about 10 years later in 1989. In my career, I had a job I had back in those days. His name was Larry, and he was probably, along with Chris, Larry was probably my best music and Beatles buddy of all time. Larry was a good close friend. We shared a lot together. I met him at work, and you know how you get casual acquaintances with people at work, you know, your work friends and that. But with Larry, it was something different. Larry and I struck a chord that not only do we have the work and career thing in common, but we had the music thing in common. We loved a lot of the same music. We were about the same age. He was a long-trained drummer. He was a professionally trained drummer. He could read drum music and drum with the best of them. He could play a little guitar. He could play a little piano, and I played a little guitar at that time. So we had the musical aspect that bonded us. But the other thing that also bonded us was the Beatles. You know, Larry had his own interest with his types of music, and I had my interest on the other side with my types of music. But the one musical artist that bonded us so strongly was the Beatles. And in specifically the White Album, again, as with Chris, Larry and I listened to the White Album throughout the 90s and 2000s. I mean, every autumn we'd listen to this album and get into this album, and among all the other Beatles albums throughout the year. But I just want to especially mention the White Album because it meant a lot to him during the autumn and the fall, and whenever I listen to the White Album or have it in my hands, I think of Larry. Sadly, Larry passed away a couple of years ago. I may have told Joe, Mr. Mayo, about it, or somebody else, but Larry passed back in 2016, about 2 years ago, and so I just wanted to, you know, mention him and as a little tribute to him. And also a special mention to my friend Chris, who, thank goodness, is still with us and here. And I just miss Larry, and I wish he was still here to see this, because it breaks my heart that he especially would have loved to seen this album get its 50th anniversary release. And in such an extensive form with the Esher demos and all the 50 plus extra alternate cuts and tracks. And I know we would have been sitting down in this room at some point this week, and we would have been putting this album on and listening to it and getting into the new stuff and just talking it over and reminiscing about it. So again, I don't mean to be melancholy here, folks, but there's going to be a lot of videos coming up this week with people showing their new vinyl copies of the White Album 50th, the Deluxe, Super Deluxe, and the regular Deluxe. And I just wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to bring it back to the beginning, back to, you know, beat up old pictures with tape marks on them, and old records with Scotch tape on it, and just say, you know, it's so nice that 50 years later, an album like this could come out. Sorry, George. An album like this could come out and have such an impact on all of our lives and establish friendships and keep those friendships for many years and have the same common link with the music we love, and especially with the Beatles and especially with the White Album. So I want to thank Chris. I'm really looking forward to him getting his brand new 50th anniversary edition of the White Album that I'm having sent to him. And I want to pay special tribute to my friend Larry, who's no longer here, who would have loved to have seen this release. And that's it, folks. That's my little tribute this morning to the White Album. I'm sure I'll do an unboxing when I get the 50th edition, but I just wanted to say, isn't it wonderful how music can bond us, bring us all together as friends in the VC, in the Beatles community. I've made some great friends here, and I appreciate them. And but I have to look back to the old friends too, who were there in the beginning. And thank you, Chris. Thank you, Larry. Love you guys. Love you also. Bless you. Enjoy the new release. I know I will. Thanks. Bye-bye. God bless.